Hello and welcome to the next video in the How to Build Your Own Desktop PC video series. Today is going to be the most exciting video. Today we're going to be putting together all the components that I have discussed in previous videos, as well as getting the new PC up and running. This should be really fun. Let's get to it. Check out all the parts that I'll be putting together here. First of all, PC ATX case. I have an AMD Radeon RX 580 GPU right here. I've had this for a few years. It's been working great, so I don't plan on really upgrading it. So I'm going to reuse it from my previous desktop PC. I've got my Asus motherboard right here. A pair of RAM sticks. This is the heatsink. I went with the Noctua NHU12S. I've used Noctua heatsinks in the past, and they have always had fantastic performance for cooling my CPU, so I stuck with that model. I'll be installing an Intel i7 14th Gen processor. I have a 750 watt Corsair power supply. Then I have some hard drives from my previous desktop, as well as a new 2 terabyte SSD solid state drive. Be sure to check some of the previous videos that I've posted in this video series as I go through some of these components in a little bit more detail to discuss some things and ideas and concepts that are good for you to consider if you plan on building your own desktop PC. It's also worth mentioning that the Asus motherboard that I bought did not support the Intel 14th generation processors out of the box. However, the Z790 Intel chip does support 14th generation Intel processors as long as you update the BIOS. I have a separate video that shows how to update the BIOS of a Z790 if you have a model like this, which doesn't have the flashback feature, which is a feature that enables you to plug in the USB and upload the BIOS. So I'll leave the link below for that video in case you are in the same situation where you have to update the BIOS in order to install an Intel 14th generation processor. So it's pretty exciting putting a new desktop PC together. This should be fun. Let's get to it. Throughout this video, I plan on showing all the details and all the steps so you know exactly the kinds of things that you could run into as you're putting together a desktop PC such as this. So a quick overview of how I'm going to tackle this project. First of all, I'm going to install the CPU on the motherboard without installing anything else, then attach the heatsink to the motherboard. I'm going to do that so I have full access and free movement of the motherboard as I install the heatsink onto the CPU. This should make it pretty easy to get the CPU and the heatsink installed. Once the heatsink is installed on the CPU on the motherboard, then I'll go ahead and put this assembly in the case. Once I have it in the case, I'll connect the power supply, connect the solid state drives, and then I will connect the GPU as well as the RAM sticks. Then we should be up and running. Next, we'll get the system up and running. I'll show you how to get an initial boot of the system if you don't have any hard drives that are preloaded with a Windows or Linux operating system. If you're going down that route, I'll show you how to get the system booted up with a bootable USB drive that has the information you need. Having a bootable USB drive is actually a prerequisite to doing this desktop PC building, unless you have a hard drive like I do that is preloaded with Windows. But to be complete, to try to help out those who don't have hard drive that has Windows on it, let's go ahead and create a bootable USB drive. So assuming you have an existing laptop or another desktop PC, here's how you can create a bootable USB flash drive that enables your system to power up and load Windows so you can get a Windows copy installed on your hard drive. To create a bootable USB drive that has Windows on it, simply go to Google, search for Windows bootable USB. You'll get a couple of results. There's a learning page that Microsoft has, which is informational. Go ahead and you can read that if you want. Simply select the create installation media for Windows. Select the version of Windows you want. In my case, I'm going to be using Windows 10. That takes you to this page. You'll see create Windows 10 installation media. Go ahead and create download now. So Windows Explorer pops up. Create a new folder where you want this to go. Windows Explorer, select the folder where you want to save it. I'm going to save it right here in this folder. Click Save. And this will go ahead and download that file to that folder. Here it is completed. Once you have that, go ahead and double click and open the media creation tool. This will download Windows and create a bootable USB flash drive that you can use to start up your system before you set up your hard disk drives as part of building the desktop PC. So in my case, I'm going to go ahead and right click on the flash drive that I inserted. I know it's drive D, and I'm going to hit format. I'm going to do a quick format. What I'm trying to do there is I just want to go ahead and erase everything that's on there so I can actually use this flash drive to create a bootable USB drive. So now that I flashed this USB flash drive, go ahead and start the media creation tool. The media creation tool will start running. Just give it a second, and we'll simply walk through the prompts, read the applicable notices, click accept. This process will take about 10 minutes, so you're going to have to maybe let it run and come back to it, but effectively it'll take about 10 minutes to download all the files and write it to a flash drive. So once you get to this prompt, you don't want to upgrade this PC. What we want to do is create installation media. So go ahead and select this radio button right here, click next. I have no reason to change these settings. I will continue to use Windows 10 64-bit. That's what I use in my previous desktop PC, as well as the new one that I'm building. So keep the recommended settings. Select USB flash drive. Make sure that your flash drive has at least 8 GB of data. Click next. In my case, I only have one USB flash drive selected, and it is drive G. So it went ahead and selected that. That's exactly the one I want. So I'm going to go ahead and click next, and then I'll let it run through the download and installation process. So now it's almost done with the downloading process. It's going to go ahead and verify the download, and then it's going to start configuring the flash drive to be used as a bootable USB drive. So notice there's no files on the flash drive yet. I do expect to start seeing files get populated here as the creation step of this tool completes. So as you can see, drive G has now been renamed to ESD-USB. That tells me that this USB drive is being written to by this tool as it creates a bootable USB flash drive. Nearing completion. And finally, the flash drive has been completed and this process has been finalized. So go ahead and click finish. And there you go. At this point, I can take this flash drive, plug it into a USB port on my new desktop PC. And then as the system is booting up, I can select this flash drive to be my bootable media. And at this point, it will load Windows and I can get my system installed, etc. And I can actually perform an installation of Windows, a real installation of Windows on my permanent solid state drive or hard drive or whatever you have to get Windows installed. And then from there, you'll have your new desktop PC ready to go. I opened up the contents of my new heatsink, and there was a lot of stuff that I didn't hear, but let's break it down. Basically, here is the heatsink and the fan. One thing to note about this M.2 NH-U12S that I went with is I also took a close look at the expected sound. The noise coming out of the fan is very important. After all, I do want a cooled desktop PC that isn't noisy. I don't want the fans just whirring the whole time, making an annoying noise. So you can check the decibel level of the heatsink that you choose. It's always on the spec sheet. So in my case, the maximum expected noise is 22.4 decibels, which is actually relatively low compared to other heatsinks. So I chose this because it's also got really good reviews. I'll leave a link below in case you're interested. But here's the heatsink. It is basically a large chunk of metal. Here is the section that goes on top of the processor. So what you do is we'll put some thermal paste on the CPU itself. And what that will do is it will enable conduction of the heat between the CPU. This will sit on the CPU. The putty will kind of get spread around. This will take the heat. You see these pipes right there. We'll basically take that heat and spread it evenly on all these fins. As you can see, those metal fins have spaces between them that enables the air from the fan to go through and cool it. So pretty simple concept, but really good design here. The more space, the more surface area you have because of all these metal fins. So here's the thermal paste. Comes with a set. We'll put that on the CPU here in a minute once we get it all installed. Okay, so most motherboards will come with a cover on the CPU socket. So all you got to do is simply pop the cover off. The cover is really intended to protect these pins below it, to make sure they don't get bent or get moved or anything like that. So what we're going to do is remove the CPU bracket right here, which holds the CPU in place. Make sure it doesn't move. So the way to do that is you simply push down on this lever right here, move it to the outside, and this moves this lever right here, moves this metal piece, which pushes down on the socket. So at this point, we're ready to go ahead and install the processor. One other important thing to note is, notice this arrow. There's an arrow right here. There's a notch right there, which matches the notch on the CPU itself. Basically, there's one specific orientation where you install the CPU onto the motherboard, and you don't want to, you can't move it, you can't install it sideways like this, obviously, but you don't want to install it like that either. So there are notches that make sure that you install the CPU in one specific orientation. So go ahead and take the CPU out. Now, when you do that, make sure that you hold the CPU from the side and don't touch the back pins. Here are the back pins. You don't want to touch these. Make sure that you are holding from the side like that or top. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the CPU, make sure that the arrow is bottom left, bottom left. So line up the bottom, and it should drop in place. Now, notice that there are little plastic notches on the outside that make sure that the CPU is installed correctly and it's lined up correctly with the pins below it. So pretty easy to install. Can't really mess it up. It takes a lot of effort to actually mess up the orientation of how you install that CPU. You will notice a little bit of wiggle. See that? Teeny tiny wiggle. Not a big deal. Nothing to worry about. As long as the plastic notches, see the two on the bottom, two on the top, as long as these are lined up and it is seated in place, you don't have to use any force. You don't have to push it down or anything like that. You just place it in its spot like that, and then you close the bracket around it. You see the two metal pieces on the side, and then up here, as I push the lever down, this will secure the CPU in place. Go ahead and push down, and there you go. Now the CPU will not move, will not budge, and is secured in place, ready for the heatsink to be installed on. So one thing I like about Noctua products and heatsinks is that they have a lot of good detail in how they design these heatsinks. They are designed to fit perfectly with make a good best contact possible with the processor. So in this case, attention to detail here is very, very important. For my model, and every model is a little bit specific, so every model of the heatsink is very specific, but in my model, there are two notches here. If you look carefully at the screws have a triangle at the base of them, and this triangle enables it to fit perfectly in either the top side of this diamond or the bottom side of the diamond. So in my case, because this is an LGA 1700, I need it to fit in the top side. And notice that it will not actually move to the bottom side. So when preparing the bracket, make sure that you put the screws in the top side away from the center of the bracket. Be aware of the orientation and make sure that you put these screws so that they fit snug in the top section of these holes. These holes are not round, they are diamond shaped. So put these two, line them up perfectly and secure them with this clip, just like that. Again, make sure it's away from the center. Okay, so now this is lined up to the exact sizing for an LGA 1700 processor like the one I'm installing today. So now I'm going to take the motherboard with the CPU attached, and then I'm going to flip it to the back side. And as you can see, there are pre-drilled holes right here that are ready to have the bracket installed. So just simply take your bracket that we prepared, and they should fit on the outer holes. As you can see, those holes have two drills in them for two different sizes. This should fit in the outer hole of this, and you should see it line up perfectly with the existing back plate. Now remember, there's an orientation, there's only one side these back plates can fit. So with that, just simply hold it in place and flip the motherboard back on. Now we are ready to install the heatsink itself. Next step, we'll take these spacers and put them on these screws. Next, we'll install the top brackets. These are the brackets that will sit on here so that the heatsink gets screwed on these screws right here. So for LGA 1700, there are 3 notches, as you can see right there. 1, 2, 3. LGA 1700 in my case is the middle number 2 notch. So make sure you line up these perfectly, and these have a specific orientation. You can actually line these up like sideways or top. The way this is going to work is these will line up like this, and then the heatsink will get screwed up. So you can decide how you want your heatsink. You can install it like this, or you can install it like this. Either way is fine. You can decide, but in my case, I want the air to flow from the left side to the right side, which this right side right here goes to the front of the case, and that's where there's fans blowing to keep the airflow going. So I'm going to go ahead and line up the brackets in this direction so I can install the fan blowing to the right. Now both the top and the bottom section of this bracket has to be on the same exact notch. So in my case, it has to be number 2. So if I line them up to number 2, the top and the bottom would line up perfectly. Make sure that the top and the bottom are on the same notch right here, not top at 2 and bottom at 1. The exact sizing here is very, very critical to make sure that the heatsink fits well, exactly perfectly square on the CPU and correctly conducts heat away from it. So in my case, I got number 2 on the top here, the second notch, top and bottom. We'll do the right side. Same thing. Here it is one more time. As you can see, 3 notches, 1, 2, and 3, left and right. We want to line up to number 2 on both sides. So here it is, number 2 on this side, and number 2 on the top right there. As you can see, it's in the middle, so it lines them up perfectly. Same thing for both sides. Now we're ready to install the heatsink, just like that. Next, go ahead and secure these brackets. Now make sure the brackets are, the curved part is facing towards the outside, just like that. Go ahead and secure these brackets onto the main screw with this provided nut. It looks like this. No need to over tighten. Tighten one side. Now make sure you do not use excessive force, because if you do that, you could potentially crack the back of the motherboard. The idea here is to just get it snug, not over tightened. As you can see, once I feel resistance, I basically just give it a slight turn, and that's it. Just like that. That puts those brackets nice and snug, secure enough, so the heatsink can get attached on top. Okay, so at this point, we are ready to apply thermal paste to the processor. Now, there's a couple different schools of thought, a couple of different ways you could do this. For this specific shape of the processor, since it's more rectangular, it is recommended that we put a blob kind of in the middle, somewhere around here, and then smaller dots on the outside. The idea here is that you're distributing enough thermal paste when the heatsink sits on top that it actually maximizes the conductivity of heat from the CPU away. If you put it just in the middle, then the edges can get heated, and that's not really what we want. We want kind of a uniform coverage such that as much heat is being moved away from the CPU as possible. So before I put the thermal paste for real, I kind of want to see, since I know I have plenty, I kind of want to see how much is going to get squirted out with a small push. So here you go. I'm just going to try it out here. Oh, there you go. As you can see, this thermal paste, I'm pretty sure, has some silver in it to maximize conductivity. So I'm just testing how much is going to come out. I know I'm going to have plenty to apply, but I want to make sure that I put the right amounts. Not too much, not too little. Try to optimize it. So about this much is what I want to put in the center, and about this much right here is what I'm going to put on the edges. So now that I'm a little bit more comfortable with how much is going to come out of this thermal paste, I'm going to go ahead and apply it for real onto the CPU. Okay, so here we go. Put about 2, maybe a 1/4 inch or so in the middle, just like that. And then 4 dots on the outside, just like this. Okay, that should be plenty, as this is going to get spread around to make sure that there is pretty good conductivity. Once I place the heatsink on this, it's going to effectively become a layer between the CPU and the metal bottom piece. So that should be good enough. I'll put away my thermal paste. Okay, so what we're going to do now is install the heatsink onto the CPU. We're going to do that in one movement. So we're going to go ahead and push this down and make sure that we line up the screws right here, the side screws, with these side pieces. So here we go. Just lowering it gently. By lining up the screws, we know it's going to line up with the processor. So here's one side. I'm actually going to go ahead and remove one of the fan attachments. That way I can access the one side of the screws. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my screwdriver. And tighten the one side in place. And as I tighten down, the metal plate at the bottom of the heatsink will make contact with the CPU and get it lined up perfectly. Again, no need to over tighten, but you do want to get it tight enough. And as you screw this down, you'll get to the point where you can feel it. You can't really tighten it anymore. So at this point, this heatsink is now blended in with the CPU itself via this thermal paste that we put. And now I'm going to go ahead and plug the fan back on. Okay, so fan is back intact, installed. The heatsink is installed. So now that the heatsink is installed, next very important step is to connect the fan connector to the motherboard. So if you look carefully, somewhere near the motherboard, you'll have a CPU fan right here. As you can see, CPU fan, it's a 4-pin connector that matches this. Also, you'll see there's like notches on the connector itself that tells you that the orientation should line up in a specific way. And that specific way is as follows. Simply connect the notches around the plastic piece, just like that. And what this connector does is enables the motherboard to control the fan speed. So as it detects more heat, the motherboard does track the temperature of the processor itself. And as the motherboard detects more heat, it will increase the rounds per minute, the fan speed, to get more airflow going so it can cool it faster. So as part of connecting the heatsink, make sure you connect the power connector right here, which enables the motherboard to turn the fan on and off and also adjust its speed. So now we've got our CPU, a processor installed onto the motherboard, and we got the heatsink installed onto the processor and the fan connected. So at this point, believe me when I say you've effectively completed almost half of this building project, because the rest is actually mostly plug and play. This is the most involved step in putting together your desktop PC as you're building it. Putting together the heatsink onto the processor is a little tricky, can be a little tricky, but as you've seen, not too bad once you know the specific steps that go into putting this together. So now we're going to go ahead and set the motherboard aside and start working on the case itself. So next, we're going to go ahead and take the case apart and install the power supply into the case. So every case can vary. Sometimes the power supply is on the top, sometimes it's at the bottom. It can change from case to case, but my situation, or my case, I'm going to go ahead and install the power supply right here. As you can see, there's a cutout right here for the backside of the power supply. Prior to doing that, make sure you remove both panels, one side and the other, so we can easily have full access. Now I have full access of the case inside and out, and I should be able to get my power supply right here, secured in place, and also install my hard drive. So a few comments about this case. Every case is going to be different, like I said, but in here I've got my buttons up here, USB ports. Refer to my earlier video in this series where I talked a little bit more specifically about what a case involves. But real quick overview here, I've got my fan connectors right there, so I'm going to go ahead and connect this to power on all the fans, and then right here in this little bay, that's where I'm going to put my hard disk drives. So fairly straightforward. Also, every case will come with a various assortment of screws and hardware, so you can secure whatever you need to get your desktop built. Okay, so power supplies are pretty standard. As you can see on the front of the power supply, you'll see screw holes right here, right here, right here, right here. That's where the power supply gets secured to the case on the front. There is no other location typically to secure the power supply. So this is going to be as simple as sliding it in like this, putting case, lining up the screw holes right there. As you can see, the screw holes line up perfectly. This is standard. If you buy an ATX case and a power supply, the screw holes are usually pretty standard and you know what to expect. So this will be as simple as putting 4 screws in here, and then the power supply is secured to the case. Like I said, there's always various assortment of screws and hardware that comes along, but I do know that the slightly longer screws right here, like this, is used to attach the power supply to the case. So I'll line up the power supply and secure the first screw. This first one, I'm not gonna screw it in all the way while I line up all the others. That way I have enough wiggle to attach the rest. Okay, all 4 screws are attached. Now I'm gonna go ahead and tighten them. No need to over tighten. Remember, make sure that you just get it secure, but don't over tighten. If you over tighten, you risk damaging the power supply, which I'm a lot more concerned about than the case itself. The case is just metal. The power supply costs a lot more than the case. So here we go. Again, don't over tighten. Make sure the screws are tight. And there you go. Now the power supply is secured. As you can see, it is not moving. It is ready to go. So we'll just plug in the power to this once we're ready and we have everything else connected. So power supply is now secured. I'm going to turn to the other side right here. I'm going to go ahead and route my non-modular power supply cable. This is the ATX and CPU power cable. Refer to the earlier video I put in this series that talks more specifically about power supplies and all the connectors that come along with it. I'll leave a link below for that video so you can review it as needed. So go ahead and route the power cables to here. Obviously, as part of putting this together, we'll go ahead and secure all the power, all the cables and everything, so it's nice and clean in the end. But for now, I'll route the power cables like this, so it's ready to be connected to the motherboard. Next, I'm going to prepare the 3.5-inch hard disk drive bay right here and put one of my hard disk drives in it. And the way I'm going to do that is, instead of having to squeeze in here to screw the hard drive in place, this is removable. So I'm going to lay the case down and remove the screws at the bottom. Now again, every case is going to be different, but my goal for showing you the details here is to kind of give you an idea of the kinds of things you're going to have to do when you're putting your desktop PC together. There's going to be some variations depending on the case you select, but in my case, this is a removable bay. So all I'm going to do is grab my hard disk drive and install it in here, then attach the whole enclosure back in. So here's my hard disk drive. All I got to do is simply slide it in here. It should fit perfectly. And I'll line up the screws. Now notice that in my case, I have the hard disk drive connectors facing this way. That way, when I put it back in the case, I have access to these connectors and I can plug them into the motherboard when I'm ready to do that. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and secure it right there. Line up the screw holes. Now all this hardware that I'm installing, all these screws, should come with the case itself. You shouldn't have to buy anything. But in the event that you can't find them, these screws are very easily available, very accessible. All we're doing here is simply attaching the hard disk drive to the enclosure such that it wouldn't wobble when I'm moving this thing. You don't have to over tighten, just simply put it in place. Even with one set of screws only on one side, as you can see, this is fairly secure. Obviously, I'll do the other side, so it's not wobbling on the other side. The point is, no over tightening needed. This is just to keep it in place when I'm moving my desktop PC case around. Perfect. So here we go, all attached. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back in my case and reattach it via the screws right here. Now my hard disk drive is secured in its bay, ready to be connected to the motherboard once I get that installed. Okay, so there goes One more thing that's installed. This is what I meant when I said it's more like plug and play. After we got the heatsink done, it's fairly straightforward, not a whole lot of steps involved. Moving on. Now that I have the 3.5-inch hard disk drive installed, I'm going to go ahead and find a serial ATA connector. This will be plugged into here until I get that ready. So the connector, this is where the data gets communicated right here, plugs in the back. And leave that here, this side. And then also we'll connect a serial ATA power connector. So I do have a little bit of a tight space here at the bottom, but that's fine. I can still make it work. Just notice the orientation. There is a notch here on the side that matches the notch right there. Also, there's a little vertical piece to the connector that matches the vertical piece right there. So just paying attention to the details is going to definitely pay off. Go ahead and plug in this power connector and you should feel it kind of get easily attached. And now, since my power supply is right there, I'm going to go ahead and plug in this power connector to one of the peripheral slots, 3-pin peripheral slots. You can see down there it says serial ATA, PATA. There's 2 of them, so I'll go ahead and connect one. Should be able to do that fairly easily, just like that. Give it a plug, and then as you can see, the connector is now in the power supply. So now I've got my hard disk drive mounted, connected, and here are the cables for it. This red cable is what's going to get connected to the motherboard. Once I get the motherboard mounted to the case. So now that I got the power supply mounted to the case, I have my hard drives also mounted, power connected, and the serial ATA cable connected. Now I'm going to go ahead and connect the rest of my power cables that I'm going to need to the power supply, so I would be done with this area. So I still have access. It's a little tight here, but I should be able to have access and connect what I need. The first set of connectors I'm going to need an additional CPU connector. So those are the power connectors that came with the motherboard. Refer to the motherboard video earlier in this video series that has more specifics about the different kinds of power connectors that you could use. So go ahead and route the CPU side through, pull the cable through, and then get it lined up. Connected, you see right here it says PCIe CPU. These connectors can only get connected one way, so you can't misconfigure them or misconnect them. The next, I'm going to need a GPU. This is a PCIe cable, and I'm going to need 2 of them. That connects to the GPU, and the reason for that is that GPU actually draws quite a bit of power if it is being stressed. So same thing, route the cable through. The exact cable where you route the cable through is depending on your case. So I'm not suggesting there's a specific way to do it by any means, but just do what makes sense for your case. So I have plenty of space to route the cable through. So let's do that the opposite way. So here's the power cable. Then we'll connect this again. Give myself some wiggle room here. Line it up correctly. As you can see, I got more PCIe peripherals right there. So I'm going to pick the next available slot. One thing I could have done in hindsight is I could have connected all these power cables and before mounting the power supply. I could have done that. I guess in hindsight it's 2020, but still no need to redo any of the work that I've done. I just have to get this lined up and connected, and I should be good to go. Make sure you hear a click when you push the connector into the power supply, just like that. So next set of power connectors I'm going to need is called Molex, and it looks like this. This kind of connector is used to power fan. So you can see right here, I've got all my fan connectors right there, connected in this Molex power connector form factor. And I would simply plug one of these connectors, power connectors, into the power supply, and then I'll be able to power them all off the same. Now, fans don't consume a lot of power, so you can connect them in series as you see here. Fairly straightforward, but in order to connect all the fans, I need a power supply cable like this. So notice it's only 3 pins, so it doesn't consume a lot of power. Okay, moving on to the last power connector that I'm going to need, which is the GPU power. In this case, I got a dual PCIe connector just like this, and the reason for that is because the GPU, the graphics processing unit, does actually consume quite a bit of power, and that's why it's got a double connector like this, so you can draw as much electrical current as needed, up to a limit, of course, to get it up and running. So just gotta get that connected to here. Now this is a 4-pin connector to the power supply. Now I have all my power supply cables connected to the power supply, ready to plug into the peripherals, obviously. I have kind of a mess right here, but that's okay. That's expected. I will be adjusting all of that and cleaning it up once I get all the peripherals connected. And then I will secure the cables to the case so it's nice and neat once everything is done. At this point, we've got the bulk of the difficult steps completed. The next will be simply mount the motherboard and attach a couple more components, and then we should be almost ready to power this thing up. So next, I got the case laid flat. I've got most of the cables kind of ducked out of the way so we can lay the motherboard in here and secure it. So back to the motherboard that we worked on earlier. I'm going to go ahead and insert it in here, making sure I note orientation. The external I/O panel goes to the left here, lined up with the external side of the case. That way I can access all these. Really should be fairly straightforward because all the screw holes should line up perfectly. This is a standard form factor, as in the exact locations of where the screws are to go is already predefined. So any ATX motherboard will follow that standard, so you know that the screw holes will line up. So as you can see, all the screw holes are lining up perfectly, and I just gotta secure the motherboard. So you'll likely have hardware that looks like this, small flathead screws. So I'm gonna go ahead and secure the motherboard to the case using these small flathead screws, starting with the center screw right there. So when attaching the motherboard to the case, make sure you do not over tighten. You'll see there are 9 screws in total, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 3 on the top. So I started with lining up the center one, and then all the others should line up perfectly. Again, do not over tighten so you do not damage your motherboard. So now that the motherboard is secured to the case, I'm now ready to proceed with all the connections. And this is actually the most plug and play phase of this effort. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way from the inside of the motherboard to the outside. That way I have enough clearance to get to wherever I need to plug things in. So the first thing I'm going to install is I'm going to go ahead and install my RAM sticks. So when you buy your RAM modules, it is recommended that you buy 2 of the same speed and type. So these are DDR5. 5600 is the speed, and this is very, very important. You have to buy RAM that matches your motherboard, that otherwise it just won't work. So in my case, I have 2 memory sticks that are 32 gigabytes each, and I'm going to install them in per the manufacturer's, per ASUS recommendation. I'm going to install the RAM in the A2 and B2 slots. So there's only actually one way to install these. Since there's a keying right there, there's only actually one way to install these. And when you install them, there should be pretty much no force at all to push them in. So here we go, fairly easy. I'm going to line up the ends. As you can see, I'm lining up the notch right here. I'm going to line up the ends. Once you push in, you'll kind of feel it slide into the slot for the channel, and then you'll be able to lock it on the side. Once you have it locked like that, you know that it's secure and it fit. Same thing for the other slot. Fairly easy. Push on one side, then push on the other. You'll hear it click, and then you can lock it in place. Pretty easy. That's all it takes to install your RAM memory sticks. Next, I will install some key power connectors. So the first power connector that I'm interested in installing here is the main ATX power, which is this cable that we have routed from earlier, and this goes into this connector right here. Just push it, give it a little push, and you'll hear the click of the clip on the side. Next, I'll install the power connectors, which are right above the CPU. These are the connectors right here that provide power for the processor itself. So I have it routed from the power supply to the other side, as you can see, through one of the holes into the chassis. Here's the first one. Always notice the orientation where the clip is, because the clip matches. There's a clip on the side of the connector, and then that's when as you push, you'll hear it click. just like that. So there goes the CPU power connector. Next, a couple of quick connectors. These are the serial ATA connectors, which is the interface that enables the motherboard to talk to the hard disk drives that we mounted earlier. So these have a special connector on the side right here. You'll actually see 4 of them. So I have, in my case, in this motherboard, I have 1, 2 over here, 3, 4 down there. Should be fairly straightforward and easy. Just notice there's a notch on the side, and you got to get that notch lined up with the connector. Here's the first one. Here's this. Next, I have 2 solid-state drives, SSDs that are M.2 drives. That's this form factor right here. Like I said earlier, this is a type of storage device that does not have any mechanical parts moving. So I've used these very reliably. I absolutely love these things because their failure rate is very low, and I have not had either one of these fail in about 3 years worth of usage. I have had a hard disk drive, a mechanical magnetic one, fail on me before. So this gets installed here, and I'll show you how to do it quick. So I'll go ahead and remove the cover. So the cover removed, as you can see, that's the M.2 connector that enables one of these to be connected. So fairly easy. All you got to do is line it up, as you can see with the top. Right there, notice that there is a notch in the middle on one side. So you simply line it up, and you just tuck it in. And what I love about these ASUS boards is they make it really easy. There's a little lock that puts it in place. So once you place it in, you can simply twist it, and it locks the M.2 drive in place. It's as simple as that. No need to have any screws or anything like that. It just locks in place. Very nice. We'll do a second one right here. Again, same idea. Just line it up. Give it a little slight push. Drop it down. As you can see, it's lined up. And then you just this. It's that easy. Much easier. No power connector. No separate data connector. It just plugs in straight to the motherboard. Solid state drive, so no mechanical parts. Very low probability of failure. It is worth mentioning that something ASUS does really nicely is these heat sinks actually have, there's a pad right there where you can remove. You can buy these solid state drives, these SSDs without a heatsink. I choose to buy mine with heatsink, so I don't have to put this on top. But if you buy one without a heatsink, you can actually use this metal piece as a heatsink. So what you do is you would install the M.2 device, and then this would sit on top of it. This applies to these 2 slots right here. As you can see, there's a connector right there and a connector right there. So something to think about, something to consider when you're buying these SSDs to install in your desktop PC. Next, we have a few connectors that are coming from the chassis itself to enable the buttons on the top to work that need to be plugged into the motherboard. 2 of these connectors are actually must-haves, things that you have to connect. The main power button, that's that power SW. That's the main button that enables you to turn your PC on. If you don't have that thing, you can't really power on your system. The other really critical one is the reset SW. That's what enables you to actually reset your PC if something happens, or if you need to get it restarted. That's the button that triggers the motherboard to restart your computer. There are a couple other connectors that not as critical, but nice to have. One shows you the hard disk drive, your hard disks being accessed. If it is, the LEDs will blink. One will show you if power is applied to the system. These are not as critical. If you don't connect them, no big deal. But what you absolutely have to connect is the power button and the reset. So let's go ahead and connect these. So the exact location of where these connectors go on your motherboard will vary from motherboard to motherboard. It's also known as the front I/O connector, but in my case, it's this one right here in the corner. So go ahead and zoom into it so you see what it looks like. Let me see what these pins are like. As you can see, there are 2 rows of pins that you're going to connect. The top row is got the power LED, top left, 2, and then the power software. Next to the bottom row has the hard disk drive plus and minus, and then that's the software reset, the next 2. So it's these 4 that we're going to be connecting things to. I'll go ahead and show you how to do that right now. I'm going to simply grab them one by one. I'll just go in order so I can have easy access and be able to see it. So the bottom right one is probably the one that's going to be most finicky, that reset software. I'll go ahead and grab that connector. Here it is. And I will simply connect it to that bottom 2 pins, just like that. Now, this is a case when
It doesn't matter if there's no positive and negative, there's no polarity, so you can mix them however you want. It won't really make a difference. Next will be the one right above it, which is the power button, the power software, also known as Power SW. So I'll go ahead and connect that just like that. So now I got the two most critical connectors for turning on my computer connected. Next are the LEDs. Now these do have a polarity. In other words, you do have to connect the positive to the positive and the negative to the negative. Here's my hard disk drive. As you can see, the positive is on the left. So I'm going to line that up with the markings on the motherboard. Here it is. Fairly straightforward. And then the next one, the top two, are the power LED. If you remember, the positive was on the left. Here it is. And then the negative was on the right. So I'll go ahead and plug in the negative pin first. Then I'll plug in the positive. For some reason, it is separated. These two are separated and not connected together. So here's that. Now I have my front I/O connectors all done, all set. Fairly straightforward.
The next thing we're going to install is a connector that enables the USB ports on the case to work. So it's also known as a USB Gen 1 connector. So here it is. The location on your motherboard will vary, but in my case, if you look carefully right here, you'll see a US 2G1 right there. So that connector should match. Fairly easy. You hear a click. That's when you know it's connected. Next, I'll connect the cable that enables the front USB 2.0 ports to work. It's called a USB 2.0 header right here. And there is a missing pin right there. And that matches the port right here. This is the connector where it goes on the motherboard. It's labeled as USB 2.0 header, and it's missing the pin right there. So all I'm going to do is line up this with that and simply connect it. And then last but not least, I have HD audio. These are the audio jacks on the front. Again, there is a missing pin, the second one from the top left. And this matches this connector right here, that AAPF connector. So I'm going to go ahead and connect that, and that enables me to use the audio ports on the front if I ever need them. Because there's a missing pin, it's keyed, which means there's only one way for that connector to be installed. So you can't mess it up. You can't mismatch the pins. So with that, that concludes all the connectors, all the pieces that need to be connected, except for one big piece, which is the GPU. So we'll go ahead and do that next. So next I'm going to go ahead and install my GPU. The reason why I kept this to the very end is because it is the bulkiest component. And if I had done it any earlier, I wouldn't have any space to connect my other stuff. So it's the last piece that's required. Here we go. GPUs typically plug into PCI Express, PCIe slot number 1. So this is it in my case. Now, this motherboard has a release mechanism right there, so I have to be aware of that. So make sure that you take that into account if you ever will need to release it. If you have something like this and you need to release it. So I'm going to go ahead and line this up. Here we are. As you can see, I'm lining up the bottom of the GPU with the slot. Using extra caution here because I definitely don't want to mess anything up. Okay, so that click right there is it sliding into place, and here it is secured. I kept the power plug for it for the very end. So two connectors, a connector of 4 and a connector of 3. So here it is, and then I'm going to go ahead and secure it right here. So right on the side, go ahead and secure it with a small screw that makes sure that it doesn't slide sideways and stays intact. So this secures this in place. Now that I've got this like that, I can install this metal piece back. This just keeps it looking nice, looking cool. After all, when you're doing a project like this, you also do want to make sure it looks cool. I mean, it is your desktop PC, and you probably spent a decent amount of change here to make something like that. So feel free to make this look cool. All right, so GPU is installed, secured. That completes the bulk of the installation. One more step before we power on, I'm going to go ahead and connect the fan. So that's this Molex connector that I mentioned earlier. I had a bunch of fans and things connected like this, all in series, but I do want to clean that up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is separate these by location, try to connect them separately. So every one of these connectors can power on various pieces, but I do want to make this section look a little bit nice. I won't dwell on this too much, but just to kind of demonstrate the concept, what I'm going to try to do here is just split them by region so I can tuck the wires in and make this side look neat. So if I ever have to do any maintenance or something is wrong, I can easily come to it and know what's connected to what. So I'm not going to spend too much time. I just wanted to kind of show you the concept where I'm just going to bunch a few of these together. So there's 3 connectors here. I'll plug this in to one of those Molex connectors. And I got 2 more right here. I'll plug it in to the next one. And then last set of fans on the front, I'll plug it in to a 3rd set of connectors. And then I'll tuck the wires and make them look decent. So now some cleanup. I have no reason to have this side of the case open anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and tuck all the wires in. I've kind of moved them out of the way, distributed them so the back of the case, the side of the case can get plugged in. So I just want to tuck them down like that and make sure that I have enough load clearance so the panel would come in and settle. That's why I have the case on its side like this. That way I can easily tuck the wires. Should be able to slide it in. So just like that, slide this in and simply secure the side panel. There's 2 screw holes in the back. Basically, now that everything is pretty much almost put together, I still have some work as far as powering up, but I don't have any to access this, so I want to keep things tidied up. So that's why I'm doing this. So just give it a tug, make sure it's secure, stand the case back up. I'm going to go ahead and apply power to this new desktop PC for the first time. So turn on the power supply. And then we'll turn on power from the power button right here. Here we go. Looks like there's at least power. So we got that piece right. I'm just waiting to see if anything comes up on the screen, which indicates that it has detected something. So at this point, the motherboard is powering on for the first time. It's coming up. There's supposed to be a CPU there, the processor, there's new RAM, there's a bunch of different things. So I'm expecting the BIOS, the basic input output system of this motherboard, to take over and start assessing what's installed and what's not installed. As you power on and off and restart, you'll see that LED. There's LEDs in there that go red, yellow, white, and green. And if it goes green, then you know that things are good to go. So came up just fine. Here's my BIOS. I still see both SSDs in here, which is a very good sign. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and power up the PC from the flash drive. So this is the flash drive that we prepared earlier in the video. Keep the PC turned off, and I'm going to plug it in prior to turning on. And the reason for that is, as part of the BIOS, bring it up, we're going to tell the system to boot from that PC. I'm going to go ahead and push the power button, and then be ready to push F2 and delete to get into the BIOS right away. Okay, so it came up, I pushed F2. Here is the BIOS. I'm going to go to Advanced right here. Boot. And as you can see, this time I have a third option, which is the flash drive that I plugged in. It detected there's a flash drive there and it is bootable. Instead of going with the normal priorities, you can simply go to the boot override and click the flash drive that I set. So when I click on that, the system will go ahead and proceed to boot from that flash drive. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And next, as you can see, it's starting to boot from that flash drive. It's going to do minimal setup, minimal loading of drivers, but that's how you get the system booted off of a flash drive when you don't have a hard disk or a solid state drive that has Windows loaded. Once you bring this up, then you can get Windows downloaded and then initialize your system. And it'll say install now. And what that will do is, and it will show you the hard drives that you have installed. In my case, I have the 2 serial ATAs and the 2 M.2. Once you have Windows purchased, then you can enter a product key, and then you can select the drive that you want to install Windows on and then proceed.
I'm not going to go through the steps here, but I do want to touch on it a little bit in this video. If you're building a desktop PC that doesn't have a previous hard disk drive, you know how to do it and you know how to get the system up and running. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hold the power button, turn off, unplug the flash drive, and then proceed with the setup. So to clarify one thing, I unplugged the bootable USB flash drive, powered up the system. I did want to show one thing here. I'm going to go to Advanced, go to Boot, and as you can see, I don't have that third option, which was the flash drive. That option showed up when the flash drive was plugged in, but now that I removed it, I have the hard disk drives that are preloaded with Windows. The BIOS detects these hard disk drives and gives me a selection and a boot sequence. So I simply have boot option 1, which is the primary hard disk drive that I have that I intend to load. I'm showing this because once you go through this process of booting from the USB flash drive and then installing Windows on your hard disk drive, once you restart and you come back to the BIOS, you want to go to this boot menu and you want to make sure that boot option 1 is selecting the hard disk drive that has Windows installed on.
So at this point, everything in the PC has been put together, Windows is installed, the system is up and running and functional. All you got to do is connect your peripherals, so things like your Wi-Fi antenna, if you have one, your USB devices, your mouse and keyboard. We obviously plug these in as we were putting this together, but any other peripherals or devices or anything that are USB based, etc., you can go ahead and put this desktop PC in their final location, connect things, connect other monitors if you have them, and then you should be up and running. So this pretty much wraps up this video and also wraps up the video series for how to build your own desktop PC. I hope you found this video series helpful. I hope you learned something, or I hope at least one video was useful to you as you take on this fun and enjoyable project. If you like this video or any of the other videos in this series, please give it a like, leave a comment below, and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.